The wrapped box in my hands weighed almost nothing, which told me everything I needed to know before I even opened it. Around my parents' elaborate dining table, decorated with crystal and gold for Christmas Eve dinner, my older siblings unwrapped their gifts with genuine excitement while I held mine with practiced composure, already preparing my gracious smile. "Open it, Iris," my mother, Colette, said with false enthusiasm, her champagne glass catching the candlelight. "We thought so carefully about what you'd like this year." I pulled away the cheap wrapping paper, reused from last year, I noticed, because I recognized the crease pattern, and opened the box. Inside was a $15 scented candle from a discount store, still bearing the clearance sticker that someone had tried to peel off but hadn't quite succeeded. Meanwhile, my brother Austin was exclaiming over the $3,000 Tag Heuer watch our parents had given him. My sister Sloane was photographing her new Gucci handbag for Instagram. Both of them were in their 30s, successful and wealthy in their own right, yet still receiving extravagant gifts from our parents every Christmas. And I, at 28, with a PhD in forensic accounting and a spotless career, held a clearance candle. "It's lovely," I said calmly, setting it aside. "Thank you. We know you like simple things," my father, Preston, said with that patronizing tone he'd perfected over my lifetime. "You're not materialistic like some people." He'd said this every year, as if my supposed lack of materialism justified their consistent cheapness. As if preferring quality over quantity meant I should be grateful for literal garbage while my siblings received luxury goods. "You're so easy to shop for," Sloane added, not even looking up from her new handbag. "You never want anything expensive." "That's because I learned early that wanting things was pointless," I said quietly. "I'd never receive them anyway." The table went silent. I'd never said anything like that before. For 28 years, I'd accepted cheap gifts with grace, never complained, never made scenes. But tonight was different. Tonight, I'd finally stopped pretending I didn't notice the pattern. "Iris, that's unfair," my mother said, her voice sharp. "We give you thoughtful gifts. You give me clearance candles and used books and kitchen gadgets from dollar stores. You've done this every Christmas, every birthday, every holiday for my entire life." Meanwhile, Austin and Sloane received watches and bags and jewelry and vacations. I stood, leaving the candle on the table. I've documented it all. 28 years of gifts. The disparity is remarkable when you see it compiled. "What are you talking about?" Preston demanded. "I'm talking about the truth. The truth you've been avoiding for decades. The truth about why you treat me differently, why you've always treated me differently, and what you've been hiding from me since I was born." I pulled out my phone and opened the file I'd been preparing for 3 months, since I'd discovered the reason behind 28 years of cheap gifts and second-class treatment. "This Christmas," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "instead of accepting another insult disguised as a gift, I'm giving you all something different. I'm giving you the truth you've been desperate to keep hidden. And unlike the presents you give me, this gift has actual value." The fear in my parents' eyes told me they knew exactly what truth I was talking about. Austin and Sloane looked confused. But my parents understood that their carefully constructed deception was about to unravel, and I was going to enjoy every moment of watching it fall apart. 3 months earlier, I'd been visiting my childhood home for a family dinner when I'd accidentally discovered the documents that changed everything. My mother had asked me to get serving dishes from the basement storage room, and while searching through boxes, I'd found an old filing cabinet I'd never noticed before. The lock had been broken, hanging loose, practically inviting investigation. Inside had been folders of legal documents, financial statements, and most importantly, my grandmother Eleanor's will. Eleanor had died when I was 10, nearly 18 years ago. I'd loved her fiercely and remembered her treating me differently than my parents did, with actual affection and respect. She'd called me her brightest star and told me I was going to do magnificent things. I'd never understood why my parents' treatment of me had grown noticeably worse after her death. Now, reading her will, I understood perfectly. Eleanor had left her entire estate, worth approximately $4.2 million, to be divided among her 3 grandchildren, Austin, Sloane, and me. Each was to receive $1.4 million in trust funds, accessible at age 25 with specific conditions about education and financial responsibility. I turned 25 3 years ago. I'd never received any inheritance. I'd never even been told I was supposed to receive one. But the documents in that filing cabinet told the whole story. My parents had been designated as trustees of the inheritance funds. They'd been supposed to maintain the money, invest it conservatively, and distribute it to each grandchild upon reaching 25. Austin had received his at 25. The paperwork showed a clean transfer of $1.4 million 7 years ago, shortly after which he'd bought his first house and started his business. Sloan had received hers at 25. The paperwork showed a transfer of $1.4 million 5 years ago, which she'd used to fund her boutique fashion line. But when I'd turned 25, there'd been no transfer. No inheritance. No mention of it at all. I'd kept reading, my hands shaking, finding more documents that explained why. My parents had embezzled my inheritance. Over the course of 10 years, they'd systematically withdrawn money from my trust fund for legitimate expenses that were anything but legitimate. Luxury vacations they'd told everyone they'd saved for. Home renovations they'd claimed were investments. A beach house they'd bought with careful planning. All of it funded by stealing from the inheritance my grandmother had left specifically for me. The total amount remaining in my trust fund? $240,000. They'd stolen over $1.1 million. I'd photographed every document with my phone, my mind racing through implications. This wasn't just cheap gifts and favoritism anymore. This was financial fraud. This was theft. This was my parents systematically robbing me while pretending to be responsible trustees. And suddenly, 28 years of cheap Christmas gifts made perfect sense. They'd been treating me as less than not because I was actually less than, but because acknowledging my equal worth would have meant acknowledging their theft. Giving me expensive gifts would have created cognitive dissonance. How could they spend thousands on me for Christmas while actively stealing millions from my inheritance? So they'd minimized me, made me feel small, given me literal garbage year after year while lavishing expensive gifts on my siblings, training the entire family to see me as someone who deserved less. It had been deliberate psychological manipulation designed to cover up financial crime. I'd stood in that basement storage room, holding documents proving my parents were thieves, and made a decision. I wouldn't confront them immediately. I wouldn't give them time to hide evidence or craft explanations. I'd plan. I'd prepare. And I'd expose everything at Christmas, in front of the entire family, when they'd be expecting me to smile graciously over another cheap gift. This Christmas, the gift exchange was going to be very, very different. The days after discovering the theft had been surreal. I'd continued going to family dinners, smiling through conversations, acting like nothing had changed. But internally, everything had changed. I'd started by securing the evidence. I'd returned to the basement storage room when my parents were out and photographed every single document in that filing cabinet. Every page of Eleanor's will. Every trust fund statement. Every withdrawal authorization. Every receipt showing how they'd spent my money. Then I'd researched. As a forensic accountant, I'd known exactly what I was looking at, but I'd needed to understand the legal implications. I'd consulted with a lawyer friend named Wesley who specialized in estate law. This is textbook trust fund embezzlement, Wesley had told me after reviewing the photos. Your parents, as trustees, had a fiduciary duty to preserve and grow your inheritance. Instead, they systematically looted it. That's both a civil and criminal matter. What's my recourse? You can sue them for restitution, plus damages, plus penalties. You can also report them to the authorities for criminal prosecution. This is grand larceny. They've stolen over $1 million from you. Would I win? Absolutely. The documentation is clear. They authorized withdrawals for personal expenses using trust fund money designated for you. They failed to distribute your inheritance at 25 as required by the will. They concealed the theft from you for years. Any judge would rule in your favor. What about my siblings? Did they know? That's harder to prove. Austin and Sloan received their full inheritances, so they may not have realized yours was being stolen. But they should have noticed the disparity in treatment, should have asked questions. At minimum, They're complicit through willful ignorance. I'd spent weeks building my case. I'd gathered bank statements showing my parents' sudden wealth acquisition that coincided with my trust fund withdrawals. I'd compiled the Christmas gift history, literal spreadsheets showing 28 years of them spending an average of $18 on my gifts while spending an average of $2,400 on each of my siblings' gifts. I'd documented conversations where they'd called me low maintenance and not materialistic and easy to please, all language designed to justify giving me nothing while giving my siblings everything. And I'd prepared the presentation I'd show at Christmas dinner. A comprehensive accounting of their theft, complete with evidence, legal analysis, and next steps. The plan had been simple but devastating. Expose them publicly in front of the family, then file both civil and criminal charges the next day. Give them no time to destroy evidence or pressure me to stay silent. Make the truth so public that they couldn't manipulate their way out of consequences. But as Christmas had approached, I'd struggled with one question. How much did Austin and Sloan know? Had they realized our parents were stealing from me? Had they benefited knowingly from my loss? Or were they genuinely ignorant, thinking our parents had simply always favored them for legitimate reasons? I decided to test them. 2 weeks before Christmas, I'd invited Sloan to lunch. Just the two of us, sisters catching up, nothing suspicious. We'd met at an upscale restaurant she'd suggested, the kind of place where entrees cost $40 and she'd paid without thinking twice. Using money I now knew had originally been part of her inheritance. "How's work?" she'd asked, scrolling through her phone while we'd waited for food. "Good. Busy with year-end audits." "How's the boutique?" "Amazing. We just secured a partnership with a major retailer. It's going to triple our revenue next year." "That's wonderful. You've built something really impressive with your business." "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without the seed money from Grandma Eleanor's inheritance. That $1.4 million gave me the foundation I needed to take risks." She'd said it casually, not noticing how I'd tensed. "You got $1.4 million from Eleanor?" I'd asked carefully. "Yeah, when I turned 25. Austin got the same amount. It was in Grandma's will, equal inheritance for all 3 grandchildren." She'd looked up from her phone then, finally noticing my expression. "You got yours too, right? When you turned 25. "No, I didn't." "What? That doesn't make sense. The will divided everything equally. Austin got his, I got mine, you should have gotten yours." I never received any inheritance from Eleanor. I didn't even know there was one until recently. Sloan had set down her phone, genuinely confused. "How's that possible? Mom and Dad were the trustees. They were supposed to distribute the money at 25. Did they invest yours differently? Maybe it's in a different account. Or maybe they stole it." She'd laughed, thinking I was joking. Then she'd seen my face and the laughter had died. "Iris, that's insane. Mom and Dad wouldn't steal from you. There must be an explanation. The explanation is in their basement filing cabinet. They've been embezzling from my trust fund for years, using my inheritance money for their vacation home, their renovations, their luxury purchases. There's $240,000 left out of $1.4 million. They stole over $1 million from me while giving me clearance store gifts every Christmas." "You can't be serious." "I have documentation. Bank statements. Trust fund records. Withdrawal authorizations. I've photographed everything." Sloan had been silent for a long moment. "Then, why would they do that? Why you and not us?" "I don't know. Maybe because I was the youngest. Maybe because Eleanor loved me best and they resented it. Maybe because they knew I was the least likely to fight back. But the why doesn't change the what. They robbed me. And they've been covering it up with cheap gifts and low expectations for nearly 30 years. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to expose them. At Christmas dinner. In front of everyone. Then I'm filing charges." Sloan had looked genuinely distressed. "Iris, think about what you're saying. This will destroy the family. It will ruin Christmas." "It will. They destroyed the family when they decided to steal from one child while lavishing gifts on the others. They ruined every Christmas with their cheap, insulting gifts that reminded me I'm worth less than you and Austin. This isn't me destroying anything. This is me refusing to pretend anymore. There has to be another way." We can talk to them privately, work something out, like you and Austin worked something out when you received your full inheritances and never questioned why I didn't get mine. When you watched them give me dollar store gifts year after year and never thought it was strange. You benefited from their theft through your silence, Sloane. You don't get to ask me for discretion now. She'd left the lunch angry, defensive, insisting I was overreacting and destroying the family over a misunderstanding. But I'd seen the guilt in her eyes. She'd known something was wrong. She'd just chosen not to examine it too closely because examining it would have complicated her comfortable life. That lunch had confirmed what I'd suspected. My siblings weren't evil masterminds. They were complicit through willful ignorance, choosing comfort over confronting difficult truths. They'd get exposed along with my parents at Christmas. They'd all face the truth together. 1 week before Christmas, I'd had a different conversation with Austin. He'd called asking if I wanted to grab coffee, which was unusual. Austin rarely initiated one-on-one time with me. We'd met at a trendy coffee shop downtown. Austin had been dressed in expensive business casual, wearing the Tag Heuer watch from last Christmas, radiating success. "How's everything?" He'd asked, ordering a $7 latte without blinking. "Fine. You?" Good. Business is expanding. We're opening 2 new locations next quarter." He'd paused. "Sloane called me. Said you two had a weird lunch. Something about Eleanor's inheritance? So that's why he'd wanted to meet. Damage control. Did she tell you what I discovered?" I'd asked. "She said you think Mom and Dad stole from your trust fund." "That sounds pretty extreme, Iris. Are you sure you're not misunderstanding something?" "I'm a forensic accountant, Austin. I literally investigate financial crimes for a living. I know embezzlement when I see it. But Mom and Dad? They're not criminals. They're our parents. Our parents who gave you a $3,000 watch last Christmas and gave me a used book. Our parents who funded your business with your inheritance while stealing mine to buy a beach house. Our parents who've spent your entire life treating you like golden children and treating me like an obligation." Austin had shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know they sometimes favor us, but that doesn't mean they're stealing from you. Maybe your trust fund was structured differently. Maybe it's in long-term investments that aren't accessible yet. It's not. I've seen the documents. They withdrew the money for personal expenses, vacations, renovations, luxury purchases. They stole it, Austin. And you benefited from it every time they spent money they stole from me on gifts for you. That's not fair. I didn't know where their money came from. You knew I was getting cheap gifts while you got expensive ones. You knew I graduated with $60,000 in student loans while they paid for your entire education. You knew I was working 2 jobs in college while they supported you fully. You saw all of that and never questioned it? I thought maybe you preferred to be independent. That you didn't want their help. I worked 2 jobs because I needed to survive, not because I preferred it. I took out loans because they refused to pay for my education, not because I wanted debt. And I accepted cheap gifts because I'd learned early that expecting more was pointless. You did not know, Austin. You chose not to see. He'd been quiet, processing. Then, what do you want? Are you going to sue them? I'm going to expose them at Christmas dinner. Show everyone the documentation. Make it clear what they've done. Then yes, I'll be filing both civil and criminal charges. Jesus, Iris. That's nuclear. You'll destroy the family. The family was destroyed the day they decided I was worth stealing from. I'm just making that destruction visible. Can't we handle this privately? I'll talk to them, make them pay you back. This isn't about payback. This is about truth. This is about 28 years of being treated like I'm worth less than you and Sloane, and everyone pretending that's normal. This is about public accountability for private crimes. Austin had left that coffee meeting looking shaken, probably already calling our parents to warn them. But I didn't care. Let them sweat. Let them wonder exactly how much I knew and what I'd do with that knowledge. The warning would make Christmas even more satisfying. That evening, my mother had called. Iris, sweetheart, Austin mentioned you have some questions about Eleanor's will. Why don't you come over and we can discuss it? We'll discuss it Christmas Eve, I'd said calmly. In front of everyone. I think transparency is important, don't you? Iris, if there's been a misunderstanding, There's been no misunderstanding, Mother. I understand perfectly. See you at Christmas. I'd hung up before she could respond. 3 days later, my father had tried. He'd shown up at my apartment unannounced, looking worried in a way I'd never seen. We need to talk about this inheritance situation, he'd said when I'd opened the door. We will. At Christmas. Iris, please. If you have questions, let's discuss them now. As a family. Privately. Why? So you can craft explanations and hide evidence? So you can pressure me to stay quiet? I don't think so, Father. You had 28 years to treat me fairly. You chose theft and cheap gifts instead. Now you get to experience consequences publicly. You don't understand the full situation. I understand that you stole $1.1 million from my inheritance while giving Austin and Sloan their full amounts. I understand that you've spent my money on luxury items while giving me clearance store garbage every Christmas. I understand that you're thieves who've been covering up your crimes with psychological manipulation. What else do I need to understand? Eleanor's will was complicated. There were reasons for how we handled distributions. Then you can explain those reasons Christmas Eve. In front of witnesses. With documentation. I'm sure everyone will be fascinated to hear why you stole from one child while enriching the others. My father had left looking defeated, which had given me savage satisfaction. For the first time in my life, I'd had power in our relationship. For the first time, they were afraid of me instead of me being afraid of disappointing them. Christmas couldn't come fast enough. Christmas Eve arrived with snow falling softly outside my parents' elaborate house. I'd driven there with my laptop bag containing everything I needed, the documented evidence, the presentation I'd prepared, and the letter from Wesley outlining the legal charges I'd be filing the next day. I'd dressed carefully in a sharp black suit, professional, authoritative. The opposite of the apologetic daughter, who usually accepted cheap gifts with forced gratitude. I'd styled my hair severely, worn minimal makeup. Presented myself as someone to be taken seriously. When I'd arrived, Austin and Sloan had already been there, hovering nervously. My parents had greeted me with forced cheer, trying to act like everything was normal, even though we all knew it wasn't. Merry Christmas, Iris. My mother had said, her smile brittle. You look lovely. Thank you. Shall we begin the gift exchange? I know everyone's eager to see what they're receiving this year. We'd gathered around the dining table. The same setup as every Christmas. Expensive decorations, gourmet food, crystal champagne flutes. My parents loved performing wealth and success. They just didn't like sharing it with me. The gift exchange had followed its usual pattern. Austin receiving his expensive watch. Sloan her Gucci bag. Both exclaiming with genuine delight while I'd watched with detached observation, noting the price tags they didn't bother hiding. Then my turn. The lightweight box. The cheap wrapping paper. The clearance candle with its telltale sticker. That's when I'd stopped playing along. After my calm accusation that had silenced the table. After I'd referenced the truth they'd been hiding. My father had tried to regain control. Iris, I don't know what you think you've discovered. But this is neither the time nor the place. This is exactly the time and place. Christmas Eve, when you traditionally give me garbage while pretending it's thoughtful. In front of the family members who've benefited from your theft. Perfect timing, I'd say. I'd pulled out my laptop and opened the presentation I'd spent weeks perfecting. Let me show everyone what I found in your basement storage room 3 months ago, I'd said, connecting my laptop to the TV mounted on the dining room wall. It's quite illuminating. The first slide had been Eleanor's will. I'd read the relevant section aloud. I leave my estate, valued at approximately $4.2 million, to be divided equally among my 3 grandchildren, Austin, Sloan, and Iris. Each shall receive $1.4 million in trust, to be distributed upon reaching age 25. With my daughter Colette and son-in-law Preston serving as trustees responsible for preserving and distributing these funds. Sounds fair, right? I'd said. Advancing to the next slide. Equal inheritance for equal grandchildren. Except that's not what happened. The next slide showed Austin's trust fund distribution. $1.4 million transferred on his 25th birthday, fully intact, properly invested. Delivered as Eleanor had intended. The slide after that showed Sloane's distribution. Same amount, Same age, same proper execution. Then came my trust fund summary. Starting balance, $1.4 million. Ending balance, $240,000. Where did $1.1 million go? I'd asked, letting the question hang in the air. Let me show you. The next series of slides documented every unauthorized withdrawal from my trust fund. Each one showed the amount, the date, the stated purpose, and what the money had actually funded. June 2014, $85,000 withdrawn for necessary home maintenance. That was the month you renovated your kitchen with imported Italian marble and custom cabinets. My inheritance paid for it. November 2015, $120,000 withdrawn for investment in family business. That was when you bought the beach house in Martha's Vineyard. Again, my money. March 2017, $65,000 withdrawn for educational expenses. Except I was already out of college by then, with $60,000 in student loans you'd refused to help with. This money went to a Mediterranean cruise you took for your 30th anniversary. December 2018, $90,000 withdrawn for medical emergencies. But there were no medical emergencies that year. This money bought Dad's Lexus. I'd gone through withdrawal after withdrawal, 23 transactions over 10 years. Each one a theft disguised with vague authorizations my parents had signed as trustees. My mother had gone pale. My father had been gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles had turned white. Austin and Sloan had been staring at the screen in shock, finally understanding the full scope of what had been done. The total amount stolen, $1,160,000, I'd said. More than my entire inheritance. The remaining $240,000 is all that's left of what Eleanor intended me to have. I'd advanced to the next slide, which showed side-by-side comparisons of my siblings' financial situations versus mine. Austin received his full $1.4 million, which he used to start his business, buy his house, and build his wealth. Current estimated net worth, $3.2 million. Sloan received her full $1.4 million, which she used to launch her boutique, invest in real estate, and establish her brand. Current estimated net worth, $2.8 million. I received nothing. I graduated with $60,000 in debt. I worked 2 jobs through graduate school. I lived in cheap apartments and drove used cars and saved every penny while I gestured to my parents, spent my inheritance on luxury items and pretended you were. Just being financially responsible. My current net worth, $120,000 in savings. Minus $18,000 remaining student debt. Net, $102,000. Roughly 1/30th of what my siblings have, despite working just as hard and being just as smart. I let that sink in, watching my family process the enormity of the disparity. But the theft wasn't just financial. I'd continued, advancing to the next section. It was psychological. Because how do you justify stealing from one child while giving full inheritances to the others? You make that child seem less worthy. The next slide showed a spreadsheet I'd compiled, 28 years of Christmas gifts, with prices and descriptions. Average amount spent on Austin's Christmas gifts, $2,437 per year. Range, $800 to $5,200. Items include watches, electronics, designer clothing, vacation packages, concert tickets, sports memorabilia. Average amount spent on Sloan's Christmas gifts, $2,284 per year. Range, $750 to $4,800. Items include jewelry, handbags, spa packages, art pieces, luxury cosmetics, fashion items. Average amount spent on my Christmas gifts, $18 per year. Range, $3 to $45. Items include clearance candles, used books, kitchen gadgets from dollar stores, novelty socks, generic gift cards for minimal amounts. I'd pulled out the candle I'd received that evening, still bearing its clearance sticker. This year's gift, $15 candle, purchased on clearance for $6.99. Last year, $12 picture frame from a discount store. Year before that, $8 coffee mug with a generic inspirational quote. 28 years of this. 28 Christmases where you made it clear I was worth less. where you trained the entire family to see me as someone who deserved less, who wanted less, who was somehow different from Austin and Sloane in ways that justified the disparity. My voice had been calm, clinical, but I'd felt the emotion building behind my composure. You called me low maintenance, not materialistic, easy to please. You turned my forced acceptance of your cheap gifts into a personality trait, a character flaw that justified giving me nothing while giving them everything. But the truth is, I learned early that wanting things was dangerous, that hoping for nice gifts like my siblings received would only lead to disappointment, that the safest response to your contempt was gratitude. So I became what you wanted me to be, a daughter who expected nothing, demanded nothing, accepted everything with a smile. And I turned to Austin and Sloane. You watched this happen for decades. You saw the disparity. You knew something was wrong. But questioning it would have meant confronting uncomfortable truths about why you received so much while I received so little. Easier to believe I just preferred cheap gifts. Easier to think I was different, quirky, someone who didn't care about material things. Sloane had been crying. Austin had been staring at the table. The psychological manipulation was brilliant. Really, I'd continued. Steal from me financially while making me feel grateful for scraps. Condition the family to see my mistreatment as normal. Make me doubt my own worth so thoroughly that even now, presenting evidence of your crimes, part of me feels guilty for ruining Christmas. I'd paused, letting that sink in. But I'm not ruining Christmas. You ruined 28 Christmases with your theft and your cheap gifts and your systematic psychological abuse. I'm just making that ruin visible. My father had found his voice finally. Iris, you're misunderstanding the financial aspects. The withdrawals were legitimate. They were theft. I've consulted with an estate attorney. Everything you did violated your fiduciary duty as trustees. You had an obligation to preserve my inheritance and distribute it at 25. Instead, you looted it for personal gain. We needed that money for family expenses. You needed Italian marble countertops? You needed a beach house? You needed a Lexus and Mediterranean cruises and luxury renovations? Those aren't family expenses. Those are personal luxuries you funded by stealing from your youngest daughter. We were going to pay it back. When? After I'd lived my entire 20s in poverty while my siblings built wealth? After I'd accepted another decade of cheap Christmas gifts? After I'd been so thoroughly conditioned to expect nothing that I'd never even think to ask about an inheritance? My mother had tried a different approach. Darling, Eleanor's will was complicated. There were factors you don't understand. Then explain them. Right now. In front of everyone. Tell us all why one child deserved a full inheritance while another deserved to be robbed. Silence. That's what I thought. There's no explanation except the obvious one. You're thieves who got caught. I'd advance to the next slide, which showed the legal analysis Wesley had provided. This is grand larceny. Trust fund embezzlement. Breach of fiduciary duty. Fraud. All serious crimes with serious penalties. But more than that, it's child abuse. Financial abuse. Psychological abuse. 28 years of systematic mistreatment designed to cover up financial crimes. Iris, please, my mother had whispered. Don't do this. We can work something out. We'll repay you. You'll repay me $1.1 million plus interest? Plus damages for 28 years of psychological abuse? Plus compensation for the opportunities one lost while you stole from me? You can't afford that. You spent my money on beach houses and luxury cars. It's gone. Then what do you want? My father had demanded. Public humiliation? Revenge? Is that what this is? This is truth. This is accountability. This is refusing to accept one more cheap gift while pretending everything is fine. I'd pulled out the letter from Wesley and placed it on the table. Tomorrow morning. I'm filing civil charges to recover my inheritance plus damages. I'm also filing a criminal complaint for grand larceny and fraud. I have documentation of everything. The will. The trust fund statements, the unauthorized withdrawals, evidence of how you spent the stolen money. It's ironclad. You'd send your own parents to prison? My mother had asked. Horrified. You'd steal from your own child? For luxury purchases you didn't need? While giving me clearance store candles every Christmas. Yes, Mother. I'd absolutely send you to prison for that. I looked at Austin and Sloane. And you two will be called as witnesses. You'll have to testify about the disparate treatment you witnessed. About receiving your full inheritances while I received nothing. About watching them give me garbage gifts for years while you got luxury items. You'll have to publicly acknowledge that you knew something was wrong and did nothing. We didn't know they were stealing from you. Sloane had protested. You thought what? That it was coincidence I got cheap gifts and no inheritance? That it was my personality to prefer poverty? You knew. You just didn't want to know. There's a difference. Austin had spoken up finally. What do you want from us? What can we do to fix this? You can't fix it. You can acknowledge it. You can admit that you benefited from my loss. You can recognize that your comfortable lives were partly built on money stolen from me. But you can't fix it. The damage is done. I closed my laptop then. The presentation complete. I'm leaving now. I won't be attending any future family gatherings until this is resolved legally. When the courts have ruled and restitution has been made and you've all faced actual consequences. Maybe we can discuss whether there's any relationship worth salvaging. But Iris, my mother had said desperately, it's Christmas. Exactly. It's Christmas. The holiday when you give me clearance candles while giving them luxury gifts. The holiday that symbolized our family's dysfunction for decades. What better day to finally tell the truth? I'd picked up the cheap candle they'd given me that evening. Thank you for this gift. It's perfect, actually. It's the last cheap gift I'll ever accept from you. Every time I look at it, I'll remember this moment. The moment I stopped pretending your mistreatment was acceptable. I'd walked out of that house with my head high, leaving behind shocked silence and my family's collapsed illusions. The revenge had been exquisite. Not violent. Not illegal. Just truth. Delivered with perfect timing and thorough documentation. They'd given me the cheapest gift every year. This Christmas, I'd given them the truth. And that truth was going to cost them everything. The drive home from my parents' house had been surreal. My hands had been shaking on the steering wheel. Adrenaline flooding my system after the confrontation I'd been planning for 3 months. I'd expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I'd felt hollow, exhausted, like I'd just survived a battle that had been necessary but devastating. My phone had started ringing before I'd even made it home. My mother. My father. Austin. Sloane. I'd ignored every call, letting them go to voicemail. Once home, I'd sat in my apartment listening to the messages pile up. My mother's first message, Iris, please come back. We need to discuss this like adults. You can't just make these accusations and leave. My father's. This is unacceptable behavior. You've embarrassed the entire family with your dramatics. Call me immediately. Austin's. Look, I get that you're upset, but destroying the family on Christmas Eve? That's extreme. Call me so we can figure this out. Sloane's had been different. She'd been crying. Iris, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have questioned things, but I didn't, and I'm sorry. Please talk to me. I'd listened to all of them, noting the patterns in their responses. My parents were still trying to control the narrative, still treating my exposure as dramatics rather than legitimate grievance. Austin was tone policing, more concerned about family harmony than truth. Only Sloane seemed to genuinely understand the magnitude of what had been done. I texted Wesley, it's done. Presented everything at Christmas dinner. Filing charges tomorrow as planned. His response had been immediate. How did they react? Denial, defensiveness, attempts to minimize. Exactly as predicted. The evidence speaks for itself, though. I'll have the civil complaint ready first thing tomorrow morning. We'll file criminal charges simultaneously. Are you prepared for the media attention? This kind of case often attracts press. I paused at that. Media attention. I hadn't fully considered how public this might become. Trust fund embezzlement by wealthy parents, exposed by their daughter on Christmas Eve. Yes, that would be newsworthy. I'm prepared. The truth needs to be public. That's the point. That night, I'd barely slept. I'd lain in bed replaying the confrontation, seeing my parents' faces as I'd revealed each piece of evidence, watching Austin and Sloane realize how complicit they'd been in my mistreatment. Part of me had felt guilty, The conditioning of 28 years didn't disappear just because I'd exposed the truth. I'd heard my mother's voice in my head. You're destroying the family. You're ruining Christmas. This could have been handled privately. But another part of me, growing stronger, had responded. They destroyed the family when they stole from me. They ruined every Christmas with their cheap gifts. They had 28 years to handle this privately and chose theft instead. The guilt was their weapon, installed early and maintained through years of manipulation. But I was learning to recognize it and dismantle it. Around 2 a.m., I'd gotten a text from an unknown number. When I'd opened it, I'd seen it was from Sloane's husband, Tyler. Iris, this is Tyler. I wanted you to know, I had no idea about any of this. Sloane's devastated. She's been crying for hours. She's saying she should have noticed, should have questioned why you were treated differently. I don't know all the details, but I believe you. And I'm sorry. I'd stared at that message for a long time. Tyler, at least, seemed to understand that this wasn't about drama or family dysfunction. It was about systematic financial abuse. I texted back, thank you for saying that. I know this is hard on Sloane, but the truth had to come out. I know. She knows too. She's just processing that she was part of the system that hurt you, even if she didn't realize it. Give her time. She wants to make things right. Time is fine. But making things right requires more than apologies. It requires acknowledgement and restitution. Understood. Christmas morning had arrived with fresh snow and an inbox full of emails from my family. I'd ignored most of them, but one from my father had caught my attention. The subject line, final offer. My father's email had been characteristically blunt. Iris, I'm writing this as a final attempt to resolve this matter privately before you take irreversible legal action that will harm everyone involved. First, let me be clear. I deeply regret that you feel mistreated. That was never our intention. Your mother and I have always loved you equally with your siblings. The financial decisions we made regarding the trust fund were complicated, and I understand you feel they were unfair. Here is what I'm prepared to offer to resolve this. 1. Immediate payment of $240,000, the full remaining balance of your trust fund, transferred to your account by December 31st. 2. An additional $200,000 as compensation for any perceived inequities in gift-giving over the years. 3. A formal apology from your mother and me for not communicating better about the trust fund situation. Total, $440,000, nearly 1/3 of the original inheritance. Paid immediately. This is a generous offer that acknowledges your concerns while avoiding the destruction of family relationships and the public scandal that legal proceedings would create. In exchange, I need 1. Your agreement not to file any civil or criminal charges. 2. Your signature on a legal release absolving us of any further claims related to the trust fund or estate. 3. Your commitment to family reconciliation and moving forward. This offer expires at midnight tonight. After that, we'll be forced to defend ourselves vigorously against what we believe are false and defamatory accusations. Please consider carefully before you destroy your family over money that can be partially recovered through reasonable negotiation. Your father. Preston, I'd read that email 3 times, analyzing every sentence for manipulation and obfuscation. Feel mistreated, as if my feelings were subjective rather than based on documented theft. Perceived inequities, minimizing 28 years of cheap gifts and financial abuse. Complicated financial decisions, refusing to simply admit they'd stolen from me. Generous offer, $440,000 when they'd stolen $1.1 million. Positioning their partial repayment as generosity rather than minimal restitution. Destroy your family over money, framing my pursuit of justice as greed rather than accountability. The entire email had been a masterclass in manipulation. Acknowledge just enough to seem reasonable while admitting nothing. Offer just enough to appear generous while providing less than half of what they'd stolen. Frame my pursuit of justice as vindictive destruction while portraying their criminal behavior as merely complicated decisions. And the threat at the end, forced to defend ourselves vigorously, suggesting they'd fight back if I didn't accept their insufficient offer. I'd forwarded the email to Wesley with a note, Dad's final offer. Thoughts? Wesley's response had been swift and cutting. Classic settlement offer from someone who knows they're guilty. Offering less than half of what they stole, requiring you to waive all claims, and threatening aggressive defense if you don't comply. Don't respond to this directly. We filed charges today as planned. I'd also received an email from Austin. Iris, I've been up all night thinking about what you showed us yesterday. I need to be honest with you. I didn't know Mom and Dad were stealing from your inheritance. I really didn't. But you're right that I should have questioned why things were so different for you. I received $1.4 million at 25. That money changed my life. It gave me opportunities and security I couldn't have had otherwise. You deserved the same thing, and I'm horrified that you didn't get it. I can't fix what Mom and Dad did, but I want to help make things right. I'm prepared to give you $300,000 from my own money as partial restitution for what you lost. Not because I'm legally obligated, I know I'm not, but because it's the right thing to do. I'm also prepared to testify if this goes to court. To confirm that I received my full inheritance while you received nothing. To acknowledge the disparate treatment we all witnessed. Whatever you need to get justice. I'm sorry, Iris, for not noticing sooner. For not speaking up. For benefiting from a system that hurt you. Austin, that email had surprised me. Austin, always the golden child. Offering genuine accountability and substantial financial restitution. Maybe the shock of the revelation had cracked through his privileged obliviousness. I'd responded, "Thank you for acknowledging what happened and offering to help. I appreciate the financial offer, but I need to discuss it with my lawyer before accepting anything. The criminal charges still move forward regardless. This isn't about money, it's about accountability. But your willingness to testify means something." Sloane's email had been more emotional. "Iris, I don't know how to start this except to say I'm so sorry. Tyler and I stayed up all night talking about everything you showed us yesterday. I've been crying since you left. You're right that I should have noticed. I did notice. I just didn't want to think too hard about it because thinking about it would have meant confronting uncomfortable truths about our parents and about myself. I watched them give you cheap gifts for years. I watched you struggle financially while they helped me constantly. I watched them treat you differently, and I told myself it was your choice, your personality, your preference for independence. But it wasn't any of those things. It was abuse. It was theft. And I was complicit by not questioning it. I'm also prepared to give you money, $300,000, the same as Austin. I'm prepared to testify. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to help you get justice and to make things right between us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know sorry isn't enough after decades of complicity, but I am sorry, and I want to be better. I want to be the sister you deserved all along. Please don't give up on me." Sloane, reading that, had cracked something in my chest. Sloane, at least, seemed to genuinely understand. Not just what our parents had done, but her own role in allowing it to continue. I'd responded, "I appreciate your honesty and your accountability. The money offer helps. But more important is your acknowledgement of what happened and your willingness to testify. As for giving up on you, I'm not. But rebuilding trust will take time. You've learned to see me as someone who deserves less. That conditioning doesn't disappear overnight." By midday Christmas, I'd received variations of all these messages. My parents trying to buy my silence with insufficient offers. Austin offering accountability and restitution. Sloane offering emotional recognition and financial help. Each response had revealed character. My parents remained primarily concerned with avoiding consequences. Austin was trying to do the right thing while protecting his comfort. Sloane was genuinely grappling with her complicity. None of it had changed my decision to file charges. But it had clarified who might be salvageable in my family and who was beyond redemption. On December 26th, Wesley and I had met at his office to file the legal documents. The civil complaint had been comprehensive, demanding full restitution of the stolen $1.1 million plus interest, damages for emotional distress, and legal fees. The criminal complaint had been filed with the district attorney's office, outlining the evidence of grand larceny, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. "This is going to be public soon," Wesley had warned me. "Court filings are public record. The press will pick up on this. Wealthy parents stealing from their daughter's trust fund is newsworthy. Are you ready for that?" I'm ready. Public accountability is part of the point. Your parents will hire expensive lawyers. They'll try to paint you as vindictive, as misunderstanding the trust fund administration, as destroying the family over a dispute that could have been handled privately. Let them try. The documentation is clear. They stole over $1 million. No amount of expensive lawyering changes that. The first news article had appeared 2 days later. Local woman files charges against parents for trust fund theft. It had been a small item in the local business section, but it had included enough details to be damaging. The amount stolen, the luxury purchases funded by the theft, the years of cheap gifts while siblings received expensive ones. By the next day, the story had been picked up by larger outlets. Forensic accountant discovers parents embezzled her inheritance had run in a major newspaper, with quotes from Wesley about trust fund fraud and fiduciary duty. The story had resonated. Comment sections had filled with people sharing similar stories of family financial abuse, favoritism, and stolen inheritances. Several people had messaged me privately, asking for advice about their own situations. The press attention had added pressure on my parents. Their social circle, wealthy, image-conscious people who valued reputation, had started asking uncomfortable questions. The country club my mother loved had been buzzing with gossip. My father's business associates had been distancing themselves from someone accused of financial crimes. Public accountability was working. My parents had hired a prominent defense attorney named Harrison Caldwell, known for representing wealthy clients in financial crimes cases. He'd immediately started a PR campaign, giving interviews that painted my parents as confused elderly people being persecuted by a vindictive daughter. This is a family dispute that should have been handled privately, Caldwell had told reporters. Miss Bennett's parents have offered reasonable restitution, but she's chosen to pursue destructive legal action instead of reconciliation. It's tragic. I'd responded through Wesley, this isn't a family dispute. It's documented financial fraud. The evidence speaks for itself, regardless of how expensive my parents' lawyer is. The battle lines had been drawn. My parents were fighting to minimize consequences and preserve their reputation. I was fighting for full accountability and restitution. Meanwhile, my siblings had been navigating their own complications. Austin had publicly supported me, releasing a statement confirming that he'd received his full inheritance while I'd received nothing. That statement had cost him socially. Some people saw him as betraying his parents, but he'd stood firm. Sloan had done the same, acknowledging the disparate treatment and offering testimony. She'd also started posting on social media about financial abuse in families, using her platform to raise awareness. Some people had criticized her for profiting off family drama, but others had praised her for using her privilege to speak truth. 3 weeks after filing charges, I'd received a call from the district attorney's office. They'd reviewed the evidence and were proceeding with criminal prosecution. My parents would be formally charged with grand larceny and fraud within the month. This is a strong case, the prosecutor had told me. The documentation is exceptionally thorough. Your background as a forensic accountant certainly helped. Most trust fund fraud cases don't have this level of clear evidence. What's the likely outcome? Depends on whether they plead out or go to trial. If they plead guilty, probably restitution, probation, community service, possibly suspended prison sentence. If they go to trial and lose, actual prison time is possible, though unlikely for first-time offenders of their age and social class. And restitution? That's almost certain. The court will order full repayment of the stolen amount plus interest and penalties. Whether they can actually pay it is another question. They've spent most of your money. They might have to sell assets. The idea of my parents being forced to sell their beach house, purchased with my stolen inheritance, to pay me back had felt like poetic justice. 6 weeks after Christmas, the civil case had moved toward mediation. The court had ordered both parties to attempt settlement before proceeding to trial. The mediation had taken place in a sterile conference room with neutral mediators, expensive lawyers on both sides, and my parents looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. Harrison Caldwell had started with their revised offer, $600,000 in immediate payment, plus surrender of the beach house, appraised at $450,000. Total value approximately $1.05 million. In exchange, I'd drop all civil and criminal charges. My clients acknowledged that mistakes were made in trust fund administration, Caldwell had said carefully. They're prepared to make substantial financial amends to resolve this matter. Mistakes? I'd responded. Your client systematically stole $1.1 million over 10 years. Those aren't mistakes. Those are crimes. The word stole is inflammatory and inaccurate. Trust fund administration involves complex decisions. It doesn't involve withdrawing money for personal luxury purchases. It doesn't involve giving one child their full inheritance while embezzling another's. There's nothing complex about what they did. They stole from me. The mediator had intervened. Let's focus on resolution. Miss Bennett, your parents are offering restitution that nearly equals the stolen amount. That's significant. It equals the stolen amount only if we ignore 10 years of lost investment returns, emotional damages, and the cost of opportunities one lost while they were enriching themselves with my money. Wesley had added, our demand is $1.1 million in stolen principal, plus $240,000 in lost investment returns calculated conservatively, plus $500,000 in emotional distress damages, plus legal fees. Total $1.9 million. And the criminal charges remain regardless of civil settlement. My parents had looked physically ill. That's impossible, my father had said. We don't have that kind of liquid assets. Even with the beach house, we can't pay that much. Then you'll sell other assets. Your primary residence has substantial equity. Your retirement accounts can be liquidated. You'll figure it out the way I figured out how to survive on student loans while you spent my inheritance on Italian marble countertops. You want us to lose our home. My mother had whispered. You wanted me to lose my inheritance. You wanted me to struggle financially while you lived in luxury. Yes, I want you to experience financial consequences for financial crimes. That's called justice. The mediation had gone nowhere. My parents weren't willing to pay full restitution. I wasn't willing to accept partial payment and drop charges. We left with the understanding that the civil case would proceed to trial. The criminal case had also been moving forward. My parents had been formally charged in February with 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of fraud, and 1 count of criminal breach of fiduciary duty. They'd pleaded not guilty, which had meant the case would go to trial. Their strategy, according to courthouse gossip I'd heard from Wesley, was to argue that trust fund administration had been complicated, that they'd made good faith decisions that in retrospect looked questionable, and that I was mischaracterizing normal family financial dynamics as criminal behavior. It wouldn't work. The evidence was too clear. But they were wealthy enough to try. In March, I'd been contacted by a documentary filmmaker interested in doing a piece about family financial abuse. Your case has brought attention to something that happens more than people realize, she told me. I'd like to tell your story with your permission. I'd agreed. Not for attention or sympathy, but because I'd realized my experience was part of a broader pattern. Families treating some children as more valuable than others. Parents exploiting their power over trusting children. The normalization of abuse through small repeated actions, like giving one child clearance candles while giving others luxury watches. If my story could help other people recognize and escape similar abuse, it was worth the public exposure. The documentary team had interviewed me extensively, filmed the court proceedings, interviewed Austin and Sloan, both of whom had participated willingly, and even interviewed some of my parents' friends who'd noticed the disparate treatment over the years but had said nothing. One particularly damning interview had been with my Aunt Beatrice, my father's sister, who'd said, I noticed that Iris was always treated differently. I asked Preston about it once, and he said Iris preferred simpler things. But I watched her face when she opened those cheap gifts every year. She didn't prefer them. She was hurt, and she was hiding it. I should have said something. I regret not speaking up. That interview had made me cry. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen my pain. But like everyone else, she'd chosen comfort over confrontation. The documentary was scheduled to air in May. Just before my parents' criminal trial was set to begin, April brought an unexpected development. My grandmother Eleanor's attorney contacted me. He was elderly now, semi-retired. But he'd been the one who drafted Eleanor's will nearly 2 decades ago. I read about your case in the news. He told me over the phone. I wanted you to know something that might be relevant. What's that? Your grandmother specifically included language in her will about equal treatment of grandchildren. She was concerned that your parents might favor Austin and Sloane over you. She'd noticed that pattern even when you were young. She made me include a clause specifying that all 3 grandchildren must receive equal inheritances with no preference or priority. Did she say why she was concerned? She said, your parents had always wanted sons, and that when you were born, their 3rd child and 2nd daughter, they seemed disappointed. She worried that disappointment would translate into mistreatment. She wanted to protect you financially as a counterbalance. I'd felt tears starting. She knew. Even back then, she knew. She loved you very much, Iris. She talked about you differently than she talked about Austin and Sloane. She said you had something special: intelligence, resilience, integrity. She wanted to make sure you had resources to build your life independently if your parents failed you. They did fail me. Spectacularly. I know. I'm sorry. If I'd known they were embezzling your trust fund, I would have intervened. But trustees have broad authority, and I had no reason to suspect they'd violate their fiduciary duty so flagrantly. It's not your fault. But thank you for telling me about Eleanor's intentions. It helps to know she saw what was happening and tried to protect me. There's something else. Eleanor left a sealed letter for you, to be delivered when you turn 30. You're 28 now, so it's a bit early, but given the circumstances, I think you should have it. He'd mailed me the letter, and I'd opened it with shaking hands 2 days later. My dearest Iris, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I hope you've lived well in the years since my death. I write this when you're only 10 years old. But I already see in you something remarkable. A clarity of mind, a strength of character, a determination to see truth even when truth is uncomfortable. I also see how your parents treat you compared to your siblings. I see the small slights, the subtle favoritism, the ways they make you feel less important. I've tried to address it with them, but they don't see it, or they choose not to. That's why I've structured my will to give you equal inheritance with Austin and Sloane. I want you to have resources independent of your parents' approval. I want you to be able to build a life on your own terms. But I'm writing this letter because I worry that your parents might find ways to undermine even this protection. They're my daughter and son-in-law, and I love them. But I'm not blind to their flaws. They can be selfish. They can be manipulative. And they might resent that I'm leaving substantial money to a 10-year-old girl they seem to value less than their other children. So I'm telling you, if anything seems wrong with your inheritance, investigate. Don't accept explanations that don't make sense. Don't let them convince you that you're misunderstanding or being ungrateful. Trust your intelligence. Document everything. And if necessary, fight for what's yours. You are not less than your siblings, no matter what messages you've received. You are brilliant, capable, and deserving of every opportunity. Don't let anyone, including family, convince you otherwise. I love you, my brightest star. I'm proud of who you are and who you'll become. Your grandmother. Eleanor. I'd read that letter dozens of times over the following days. Eleanor had known. She'd seen what would happen. She'd tried to protect me. And when she'd realized her protection might not be enough, she'd left me this message: validation, encouragement, permission to fight for myself. She'd given me something more valuable than money. Confirmation that I wasn't crazy, wasn't oversensitive, wasn't imagining the mistreatment. It was real, it was wrong. And fighting it was justified. I brought Eleanor's letter to the next court hearing. When the judge had asked if I wanted to make a statement about impact, I'd read it aloud. My grandmother knew my parents would fail me, I'd said. She knew they'd find ways to undermine her attempts to protect me. She told me to trust my intelligence, to document everything, and to fight for what's mine. That's exactly what I'm doing. This case isn't about money. It's about honoring the woman who loved me enough to see the truth others ignored. My mother had been crying. My father had been staring at the floor. The judge had been visibly moved. Miss Bennett, this court recognizes that trust fund embezzlement is not just a financial crime but a profound betrayal of family obligation and parental duty. Your grandmother's letter makes clear that she intended equal treatment for her grandchildren and that she foresaw the possibility of the exact abuse you've experienced. That hearing had shifted the case's momentum. The judge had been sympathetic before, but now he was actively aligned with my pursuit of justice. The criminal trial began in early May. The prosecution's case had been straightforward. Here's the will showing equal inheritances. Here's the trust fund documentation showing systematic withdrawals for personal expenses. Here's the evidence of luxury purchases funded by stolen money. Here's the disparity in how siblings were treated. My testimony had taken an entire day. I'd walked through discovering the documents, realizing what they meant, documenting the pattern of cheap gifts, compiling evidence of theft. I'd been calm, clinical, factual, exactly what a forensic accountant should be when presenting financial crimes. The defense had tried to rattle me during cross-examination. Ms. Bennett, isn't it true that you have a history of conflict with your parents? I have a history of being mistreated by them, yes. You've described them as manipulative, psychologically abusive, contemptuous. These are strong accusations. They're accurate descriptions based on decades of experience. Could it be that you're misinterpreting normal parental decisions through a lens of resentment? No. Normal parental decisions don't involve stealing $1.1 million from one child while giving full inheritances to others. Normal parents don't give one child clearance store candles while giving others $3,000 watches. There's nothing normal about what they did. Your parents have offered substantial restitution. They've offered partial restitution after being caught. That's not generosity. That's damage control. Austin's testimony had been powerful. He'd confirmed receiving his full inheritance, described the disparate treatment he'd witnessed, and acknowledged that he should have questioned the pattern earlier. Did you ever ask your parents why Iris was treated differently? The prosecutor had asked. No. I assumed she preferred it that way. But that assumption was convenient for me. Questioning it would have meant confronting uncomfortable truths about the family dynamics I benefited from. Sloane's testimony had been similar but more emotional. She'd cried describing the cheap gifts I'd received over the years, acknowledging her complicity through silence. I told myself Iris was just different, she'd testified, that she didn't care about material things. But I knew better. I saw her face when she opened those gifts. I saw the hurt she was hiding. I just didn't want to think about what it meant. The defense's strategy had been to argue that trust fund administration was complex, that withdrawals had been made in good faith for legitimate purposes, and that I was criminalizing normal family financial management because of unrelated resentments. It hadn't worked. The judge had noted that trustee authority, while broad, didn't include taking trust funds for personal luxury purchases. That the pattern of withdrawals coinciding with major purchases proved intentional theft, not administrative confusion. That giving one child nothing while giving others everything demonstrated not complicated decision-making but deliberate discrimination. In mid-May, the jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. My parents had been convicted of grand larceny and fraud. The sentencing hearing had been scheduled for June. The civil case had settled the next day, with criminal convictions secured. My parents' lawyers had advised immediate settlement. They'd agreed to pay $1.65 million, the full stolen amount plus interest and partial damages, through liquidating assets including the beach house, taking out loans against their primary residence, and draining their retirement accounts. It wasn't the full $1.9 million Wesley had demanded, but it was close enough to be satisfying. My parents would spend the rest of their lives financially struggling, dealing with consequences of their own choices. The documentary had aired a week after the guilty verdict, while public interest in the case was highest. It had been watched by over 3 million people in the first week, sparking national conversations about family financial abuse, favoritism, and trust fund fraud. I'd done interviews about the case, always emphasizing the same points. Document everything, trust your perceptions, don't accept mistreatment just because it comes from family. And understand that fighting back isn't cruel, it's self-protection. Dozens of people had contacted me with their own stories. Some had successfully recovered stolen inheritances after being inspired by my case. Others had started documenting disparate treatment, building cases against family members who'd financially abused them. My story had created a template for others. The sentencing hearing in June had been the final major court appearance. The judge had sentenced my parents to 2 years in prison, suspended pending successful completion of 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution as agreed in the civil settlement. The court finds this to be a particularly egregious breach of parental and fiduciary duty, the judge had said. You systematically stole from your youngest daughter while enriching her siblings. You funded luxury purchases with money that should have been preserved for her benefit. You compounded the financial theft with psychological abuse, consistently treating her as less valuable than her siblings. The suspended sentence reflects that you're elderly first-time offenders. But make no mistake, this was serious criminal behavior that has permanently damaged family relationships and harmed your daughter's financial security. My parents had looked broken, aged by the process, facing financial ruin and social disgrace. I'd felt satisfaction but also exhaustion. The battle had been necessary, but it had been draining. I'd spent 6 months proving things that should have been obvious, fighting people who should have protected me, exposing truths that should never have been hidden. After the sentencing, I'd spoken briefly with my parents outside the courthouse. It was the first conversation we'd had since Christmas Eve. I hope you're satisfied, my father had said bitterly. You've destroyed us. You destroyed yourselves through your own choices. I just stopped covering for you. We're losing everything. Our reputation, our savings, our community standing. Was it worth it? You took everything from me first. My inheritance, my financial security, 28 years of dignity. Yes, it was worth it to stop you from continuing that theft. My mother had spoken then. Her voice small. I'm sorry, Iris. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. We were wrong. You were criminal. There's a difference. Can you ever forgive us? I don't know. Ask me in 5 years after you've completed your restitution payments and your probation and you've demonstrated genuine change. But forgiveness isn't automatic just because you're finally facing consequences. What happens now? My father had asked. Now you rebuild your lives within your actual means. You learn to live without luxury items purchased with stolen money. You experience the financial struggle I experienced for years while you stole from me. You face the discomfort you've spent decades avoiding. And you? What will you do? I'll use the restitution money the way I should have been able to use my inheritance 10 years ago, for opportunities, investments, security. I'll build the life I was supposed to have. And I'll do it without you unless and until you prove you're worth having in it. I'd walked away from them then, toward a future I was finally free to create on my own terms. 1 year after that Christmas Eve confrontation, I'd found myself in a surprisingly different place. The restitution payments had been completed. My parents had sold their beach house, downsized to a modest home, liquidated most of their retirement savings. I'd received $1.65 million, which I'd invested carefully with the help of a financial advisor. My career had flourished. The publicity from the case had led to job offers from major firms wanting a forensic accountant with a proven track record of uncovering financial fraud. I'd taken a position that doubled my salary and gave me the freedom to choose my projects. I'd also started a non-profit organization called the Eleanor Foundation, named after my grandmother. The foundation provided legal assistance to people fighting family financial abuse, connected victims with resources, and raised awareness about trust fund fraud and favoritism. Your grandmother would be proud, Wesley had told me when we launched the foundation. You took your pain and turned it into protection for others. My relationship with Austin had gradually rebuilt. He'd followed through on his offer of accountability, testifying when needed and offering ongoing support. We'd met for coffee monthly, slowly reconstructing a sibling relationship based on honesty rather than family mythology. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, he'd told me during one of these meetings. I benefited from a system that hurt you, and I chose not to examine that system too closely. You've acknowledged it and changed. That's what matters. The past is fixed. What we do going forward is what defines the relationship. Sloan and I had rebuilt even more deeply. She'd used her social media platform to talk honestly about complicity, privilege, and the importance of questioning family dynamics that benefit you. She'd also donated $100,000 to the Eleanor Foundation and become actively involved in its work. I want to be the sister I should have been, she'd told me. Not the one who accepted your mistreatment because it was convenient. the one who fights for you even when it's uncomfortable. My relationship with my parents remained distant, limited to brief texts and occasional phone calls. They'd completed their community service, made their restitution payments, and were living quietly in their downsized home. My mother had written me several long letters apologizing, explaining, but not excusing, their choices, and acknowledging the damage they'd caused. I'd read the letters but hadn't responded extensively. "I can't promise we'll ever have a close relationship again," I told her during one phone call. "You spent decades treating me as disposable. That doesn't just disappear because you're finally sorry. I understand. I just hope someday you'll let us try to be better parents." Maybe. But that's years away, if ever. Right now, I'm focused on building my own life without you in it. The most surprising development had been romantic. I'd started dating Wesley, the attorney who'd helped me build my case. What had started as professional respect had evolved into something deeper as we'd worked together on the Eleanor Foundation. "I'm not taking advantage of a client, am I?" He joked when we'd first discussed dating. "That feels ethically questionable. You stopped being my lawyer when the case settled. Now you're just someone I respect who happens to be attractive and share my values about justice and accountability. In that case, would you like to have dinner sometime? As non-lawyer and non-client?" I would. We'd been together for 8 months now, building something healthy and equal, the kind of relationship I'd never seen modeled in my family of origin. 18 months after the Christmas confrontation, I'd been invited to speak at a conference about family financial abuse. The audience had been filled with lawyers, social workers, financial advisors, and victims seeking support. I'd told my story, the decades of cheap gifts, the discovered theft, the careful documentation, the public exposure, the legal battle, and the eventual restitution. But I'd focused less on revenge and more on transformation. The goal wasn't to destroy my parents, I'd explained. The goal was to stop them from continuing to abuse me and to hold them accountable for what they'd already done. Destruction was a byproduct of accountability, not the primary objective. What I learned through this process is that family loyalty can't require acceptance of abuse. That love without respect isn't actually love, it's manipulation. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to participate in your own mistreatment. During the Q&A session, a young woman had raised her hand. "How did you find the courage to confront your family?" "I'm in a similar situation. My parents stole my college fund, but I'm terrified of the consequences of fighting back. I found courage through documentation," I'd answered. Once I had proof of what they'd done, it stopped being about my word against theirs. It became about facts versus denials. Documentation gives you power when power otherwise seems impossible. Also, I realized that the consequences of fighting back couldn't be worse than the consequences of staying silent. If I'd stayed silent, I would have lived the rest of my life accepting their mistreatment, watching them treat me as less valuable, and knowing I'd let them get away with stealing from me. That consequence, living with that knowledge, was worse than any fear of family conflict. Another person had asked, "Do you regret how public it became?" The documentary, the media coverage, the exposure? Sometimes. Public exposure has costs. Everyone knows your business, people judge your choices. You become a symbol rather than just a person. But the publicity also created accountability that private confrontation couldn't have achieved. My parents couldn't manipulate their way out of public criminal charges the way they might have manipulated their way out of private confrontation. Plus, going public helped other people. I get messages weekly from people who've used my story as a template for addressing their own family financial abuse. If my exposure helps even a few people escape similar situations, the cost was worth it. After the conference, several attendees had approached me privately to share their stories. A man whose parents had stolen his veterans' benefits. A woman whose siblings had embezzled her share of an inheritance. A person whose spouse had hidden debt and financial abuse for years. Each story had been unique in details but similar in pattern. Someone with power exploiting someone more vulnerable, using family bonds as cover for financial crimes, and counting on the victim's loyalty to keep the abuse hidden. I'd listened to each story, offered advice, connected people with resources, and reinforced the same message. You deserve better. You're not overreacting. Documenting and fighting back is justified. 2 years after the Christmas Eve confrontation, I'd organized a small, private Christmas celebration. Just people I'd chosen. Wesley, Austin and his family, Sloan and her family, a few close friends. No obligation. No performance. No cheap gifts hiding expensive contempt. We'd exchanged thoughtful presents. Wesley had given me a first edition of a book I'd mentioned wanting. Austin had given me a framed photo of Eleanor and me from when I was young, with an engraved note to the granddaughter who honored her grandmother's love. Sloan had given me a custom-designed necklace with Eleanor's birthstone, and I'd given them gifts that reflected actual care, things they'd mentioned wanting, items chosen with attention and respect. It had been the first Christmas in my life where gift-giving felt like genuine affection, rather than a ritual highlighting my unworthiness. "This is what it should have been," Sloan had said quietly as we'd cleaned up after dinner. "All those years. This is what Christmas should have felt like." But it didn't. And we can't get those years back. We can only build better ones going forward. I know. And I'm grateful you're giving us the chance to do that. My parents hadn't been invited. They'd sent gifts, expensive ones, for the first time in my life, but I'd returned them unopened. They'd sent cards expressing love and regret, but I'd filed them away unread. "Are you punishing them?" Wesley had asked when I'd told him about returning the gifts. "No. I'm protecting myself. They spent decades teaching me I didn't deserve nice gifts. Now they're sending expensive ones to prove they've changed." But changed behavior isn't one Christmas of expensive gifts. Changed behavior is years of demonstrated respect. They haven't earned the privilege of gift-giving yet. Will they ever? Maybe. If they continue making restitution payments, if they complete their probation without violation, if they demonstrate genuine understanding of what they did wrong, rather than just regret it being caught. But it's not guaranteed. Some damage is too extensive to fully repair. On Christmas Eve, 2 years after the confrontation that had exposed everything, I'd sat with Wesley in the home I'd bought with part of my restitution money, a modest but comfortable house that was fully mine, paid for with money that should have been mine all along. "Do you ever regret it?" Wesley had asked. "The exposure, the legal battle, the family rupture? Never. What I did stopped ongoing abuse and held criminals accountable. The family rupture was inevitable once I stopped accepting mistreatment. Better to have it happen on my terms, with documentation and legal protection, than to have it happen when I finally broke from years of accumulated pain. Your parents lost almost everything. They kept their freedom despite being convicted felons. They kept their primary home despite stealing $1.1 million. They kept their marriage despite it being built partly on shared complicity and financial abuse. They didn't lose everything. They lost some things, which is what happens when you commit crimes. And you? What did you gain? Self-respect. Financial security I should have had at 25. Relationships with Austin and Sloan built on honesty rather than dysfunction. The satisfaction of knowing I fought for myself when fighting seemed impossible. And the knowledge that I honored my grandmother's memory by refusing to accept the abuse she'd tried to protect me from. That's more than money. Money was never the point. The point was refusing to be treated as less than. The point was making visible the abuse that had been hidden for decades. The point was teaching my family and anyone watching that exploitation has consequences. And now I build the life I should have been able to build 10 years ago. I use my money wisely. I help other people through the foundation. I maintain relationships with people who've proven they value me. And I refuse to feel guilty about any of it. Wesley had kissed me then. And we'd sat watching snow fall outside windows of a home purchased with restitution for decades of abuse. 3 years after the confrontation, I'd reached a place of genuine peace. The Eleanor Foundation had helped 37 people recover stolen inheritances or escape family financial abuse. I'd published a book about my experience that had become a resource for victims and professionals working with them. My career had continued to flourish. I'd been promoted to partner at my firm, specializing in family financial fraud cases. I'd become an expert witness in trust fund embezzlement cases, using my own experience to help courts understand the patterns and tactics of financial abuse. Austin and Sloane had become genuine siblings rather than people I was related to by accident of birth. We'd built new traditions, new patterns of interaction based on mutual respect rather than family mythology. My parents had completed their probation. They'd made all restitution payments. They'd aged noticeably, looking smaller and grayer than they had 3 years earlier. They'd requested a meeting, just them and me, no lawyers, no agenda beyond talking. I'd agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop neither of us frequented. My father had started, "We know we don't deserve forgiveness. We know what we did was unforgivable. But we wanted to tell you face to face that we understand now. We understand what we took from you, and why you had to fight the way you did. What changed?" I'd asked. 3 years ago. You were calling my pursuit of justice vindictive and family destruction. Now you understand? Losing everything changed us, my mother had said. Not just the money and the house and the reputation. Losing you. Watching you build a life without us. Seeing Austin and Sloane closer to you than they are to us now. Understanding that our choices didn't just cost us financially. They cost us our daughter. We went to therapy, my father had added. Both individual and couples. We've spent 3 years examining why we did what we did. Why we treated you differently. Why we thought it was acceptable. And what did you discover? That we resented you, my mother had said, her voice breaking. You were supposed to be our son. Our third child was supposed to be a boy. When you were born, I was disappointed. Your father was disappointed. We never said it aloud. But we both felt it. And as you grew up, my father had continued, you were so much like my mother Eleanor. Same intelligence, same clarity of seeing things. Eleanor loved you best, and we resented that too. So we treated you as less important, gave you less, expected less from you. It became a pattern we didn't even consciously recognize. The theft started almost accidentally, my mother had said. We needed money for home repairs. Your trust fund was just sitting there. We told ourselves we'd pay it back. Then we needed money for the beach house, and we took more. Each time. We justified it. We convinced ourselves you wouldn't miss it, or that you'd get it eventually, or that we deserved it for managing the trust funds. But the real reason, my father had said, was that we'd spent your whole life treating you as worth less than Austin and Sloane. Stealing from your inheritance was just an extension of that pattern. We'd already decided you mattered less. Taking your money felt consistent with that decision. I'd sat in silence processing. This was the most honest they'd ever been with me. We can't fix what we did, my mother had continued. We can't give you back the 28 years of cheap gifts and low expectations and stolen opportunities. We can't erase the pain we caused. But we want you to know we see it now. We see what we did. And we're ashamed. Therapy helped us understand that our shame isn't your problem to solve, my father had added. You don't owe us forgiveness or reconciliation. We're telling you this not to get anything from you, but because you deserve to hear that what you experienced was real, was wrong, and was entirely our fault. 3 years ago, I couldn't have said that, my mother had said. I was too busy defending myself, minimizing, making excuses. But you were right about everything. We stole from you. We abused you. We treated you as disposable. And you were correct to expose it and demand accountability. I'd looked at these two elderly people, diminished by consequences of their own choices. Finally taking actual responsibility. I appreciate you saying this, I'd finally said. It doesn't erase anything. But it's the first time you've acknowledged truth without defensiveness or excuse-making. Does that mean you'll consider letting us back into your life? My father had asked. Maybe. Eventually. But not now. You've had 3 years to process what you did. I need time to process whether I want any relationship with you going forward. That's fair, my mother had said. We'll wait. However long it takes. And if I decide the answer is no. If I decide that even with genuine accountability, the relationship is too damaged to rebuild, then we'll accept that, my father had said. Because that would also be a consequence of what we did. I left that coffee shop feeling something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that my parents had finally understood what they'd done and why it had been wrong. Whether that understanding would ever translate into reconciliation, I didn't know. But at least they'd stopped lying to themselves and to me. 5 years after the Christmas confrontation, I'd married Wesley in a small ceremony with only people we loved, chosen family rather than obligatory family. Austin had walked me down the aisle. Sloane had been my maid of honor. Both had cried during the vows. My parents had been invited. After years of demonstrated change, genuine accountability, and respectful distance, I decided to give them a limited place in my life. They'd attended the wedding quietly, not trying to claim any special role, just grateful to be included at all. The reception had been full of joy and genuine celebration, the opposite of every family gathering from my childhood, which had been performances of happiness over foundations of dysfunction. During the reception, Eleanor's attorney, now in his 90s, had given a toast. "I knew Eleanor Bennett well," he'd said. "She was a woman of remarkable clarity and deep love for her grandchildren. When she drafted her will, she told me, 'I'm trying to protect Iris. She's going to need resources because her parents might fail her.' Eleanor would be proud of how Iris honored that protection, not just by fighting for her inheritance, but by using it wisely, by building the foundation in Eleanor's name, by helping others escape similar abuse. Eleanor's legacy isn't just money. It's the courage to demand better treatment and the wisdom to build something meaningful from pain." I'd raised my glass to my grandmother's memory, to the woman who'd seen me clearly when others hadn't, who'd left me not just money but permission to fight for myself. The Eleanor Foundation had grown significantly. We'd helped over 200 people recover stolen inheritances or escape family financial abuse. We lobbied for stronger laws protecting trust fund beneficiaries. We'd trained lawyers and social workers to recognize patterns of family financial abuse. My book about the experience had sold over 500,000 copies and been translated into 12 languages. I'd received thousands of messages from readers who'd used it as a roadmap for addressing their own situations. Some had successfully recovered stolen money. Others had established boundaries with exploitative family members. Still others had found validation that their experiences were real and their fighting back was justified. My career had continued to flourish. I was now a named partner in my firm, focusing exclusively on family financial fraud cases. I'd become a sought-after expert witness and consultant, helping courts and lawyers understand the psychological and financial dimensions of family abuse. Austin had founded his own business helping financial advisors identify and report trust fund abuse. Sloane had expanded her platform to advocate for victims of family financial abuse, using her influence to raise awareness. Both had transformed their complicity into action, using their privilege and resources to protect others. My parents, now in their late 60s, had continued their quiet life of reduced circumstances. They'd both taken part-time jobs after retirement, my father as a bookkeeper, my mother as a library assistant. They'd fully repaid the restitution, completed their probation, and spent 5 years demonstrating changed behavior. Our relationship remained limited but functional. We had coffee occasionally. We attended major family events. We'd never be close, but we'd reached a détente based on mutual understanding. They acknowledged what they'd done, I acknowledged their efforts to change. And we maintained respectful distance. "Will you ever fully forgive them?" Wesley had asked one evening as we discussed my parents. "I don't know if full forgiveness is possible or even necessary. I've moved past needing them to be different than they are. I've accepted that they failed me profoundly and that those failures permanently altered our relationship. Whether that's forgiveness or just acceptance, I'm not sure." "What about the resentment? Is that gone?" "Mostly. I'm not consumed by anger anymore. I don't spend my days dwelling on what they did. But I also don't forget. The memory of 28 cheap Christmases and stolen inheritance doesn't disappear just because they're finally sorry." "Do you think you made the right choice?" "Going public. Pursuing legal action. Exposing everything? Absolutely. If I'd handled it privately, they would have minimized and manipulated. They would have paid partial restitution and expected immediate forgiveness. They wouldn't have faced real consequences or done the deep work necessary to understand their behavior. Public accountability forced genuine change, not just in them, but in how society thinks about family financial abuse. My case created a template for others. That wouldn't have happened through private family mediation. 10 years after the Christmas confrontation, I'd been invited to give a TED Talk about family financial abuse and healing from systemic mistreatment. Standing on that stage, I'd told my story once more, but with a decade of perspective, focusing less on the revenge and more on the transformation that had followed. 10 years ago, I'd said, my parents gave me a $7 clearance candle for Christmas while giving my siblings luxury gifts worth thousands of dollars. It was the culmination of 28 years of similar treatment, of being given the cheapest gifts, the lowest expectations, the least support, all while watching my siblings receive everything I was denied. But the cheap gifts were just symptoms of something deeper. My parents had stolen over $1.1 million from my inheritance while giving my siblings their full amounts. They'd been embezzling from my trust fund for a decade, funding luxury purchases with money my grandmother had left specifically for me. I discovered this theft 3 months before that Christmas. I could have confronted them privately. I could have negotiated quietly. Instead, I spent 3 months documenting everything, building an ironclad case, and planning to expose them publicly on Christmas Eve. Why public exposure? Because private confrontation would have allowed private manipulation. Because public accountability creates real consequences. Because other people needed to see that fighting back against family abuse is possible and justified. The exposure worked. My parents were convicted of grand larceny and fraud. They paid full restitution. They lost their social standing, their financial security, and their relationship with me for years. People often ask, was it worth it? Worth the family rupture? Worth the publicity? Worth becoming known as the woman who sued her parents? And my answer is always yes. Because the alternative, staying silent, accepting ongoing abuse, living the rest of my life knowing I'd let them get away with stealing from me, that would have destroyed me more thoroughly than any legal battle did. But this talk isn't about revenge. It's about what came after the revenge. Because revenge, even justified revenge, is just the first step. The real work is building something better than what was destroyed. I'd walked the audience through the decades since starting the Eleanor Foundation, helping hundreds of people escape similar abuse, publishing resources, rebuilding relationships with siblings who'd acknowledged their complicity, even eventually achieving limited reconciliation with parents who'd finally taken responsibility. 10 years later, I'd concluded, I'm not defined by what was done to me. I'm defined by what I built in response. The cheap gifts and stolen inheritance are part of my story, but they're not the whole story. The whole story includes the foundation that's helped hundreds of people, the book that's provided a roadmap for victims, the legal precedents that have strengthened protections for beneficiaries, and the personal healing that's allowed me to move forward. If you're experiencing family financial abuse, being treated as less valuable than other family members, watching others receive opportunities you're denied, suspecting that money meant for you has been stolen, know this: you deserve better. Document everything. Seek legal counsel. And when the time is right, fight for yourself. The fight will be difficult, but it's easier than living your whole life accepting mistreatment. The greatest gift you can give yourself is refusing to accept being treated as disposable. That's the gift I gave myself 10 years ago when I stood up at Christmas dinner and said, no more. The standing ovation had lasted several minutes. Afterward, I'd been approached by dozens of people with similar stories, all looking for guidance and validation. One woman had particularly stood out. She'd been in her 60s, with tears streaming down her face. My parents died 20 years ago, she'd told me. I spent my whole life accepting their mistreatment, never fighting back because I thought that's what good daughters did. I never knew I had the option to demand better. Thank you for showing that option exists. It's never too late, I'd told her. Even if your abusers are gone, you can still stop accepting the internalized message that you're worth less. You can still build a life based on your actual value rather than their assessment. That conversation had crystallized something for me. My story wasn't just about fighting specific people who'd done specific harm. It was about challenging the broader narrative that family loyalty requires accepting abuse, that love means never confronting destructive behavior. That peace is more important than justice. Those narratives protect abusers. They silence victims. And my public challenge to them had given others permission to challenge them too. 15 years after the Christmas confrontation. I'd been sitting in Eleanor's attorney's office. He'd passed away a year earlier. And I'd been named executor of his small estate as thanks for the role I'd played in honoring Eleanor's legacy. While sorting through his files, I'd found something unexpected. A folder labeled Eleanor Bennett, Personal Notes. Inside had been letters Eleanor had written to him over the years, discussing her concerns about me and her hopes that the trust fund would protect me. One letter, written a year before she'd died, had particularly struck me. Dear Wilson, I'm increasingly worried about Iris. She's only 9 years old, but I see how Colette and Preston treat her compared to Austin and Sloane. It's subtle, a tone of voice here, a dismissal there, consistently lower expectations and less enthusiastic support. Yesterday was Iris's birthday. Colette gave Austin a new bicycle for his birthday last month, easily a $200 gift. For Iris's birthday, she gave her a used book and some dollar store toys. When I asked why, Colette said Iris doesn't need expensive things. She's happy with simple gifts. But I watched Iris's face when she opened those gifts. She wasn't happy. She was hurt, and she was hiding it. At 9 years old, she's already learned to hide her pain, to accept less, to pretend it doesn't bother her. I pulled Colette aside and confronted her. I said, you're treating Iris differently than her siblings. Why? She became defensive, said I was imagining things. Said Iris truly does prefer simpler things. But I'm not imagining it. I see what's happening. And I'm terrified about what it will do to Iris over time, to grow up constantly receiving the message that she's worth less than her siblings. That's why I'm putting specific language in my will about equal treatment. I'm trying to create protection that will outlast me. But I worry it won't be enough. I worry Colette and Preston will find ways to undermine even this protection. If that happens, if after I'm gone, Iris ends up mistreated or cheated out of her inheritance, I hope she'll fight back. I hope she'll have the strength and intelligence to recognize what's being done to her and demand better. I see that strength in her already. She's the brightest of the 3 grandchildren, the most perceptive, the most likely to see through manipulation. Those qualities will serve her well if she needs to protect herself from her own parents. I just wish she didn't need to. I wish I could trust Colette and Preston to treat all their children equally. But I can't. And so I'm doing what I can, leaving money with clear equal distribution requirements, and hoping Iris will use it to build a life independent of their approval. She's my brightest star. I want her to shine. Eleanor, I'd sat in that office crying, reading Eleanor's words from 24 years earlier. She'd seen everything. She'd known exactly what would happen. She'd tried to protect me in every way she could. And her protection had worked. Not because the money itself had saved me. My parents had stolen that. But because her clear documentation of equal distribution and her encouragement to fight had given me the foundation I'd needed to demand accountability. I'd found other letters too, all expressing similar concerns, all showing that Eleanor had understood my parents' dysfunction better than anyone else in the family. In her final letter to Wilson, written a month before her death, Eleanor had included specific instructions. If Iris ever contacts you with questions about the trust fund, help her. Don't defer to Colette and Preston. Don't assume they're acting in her best interests. Treat Iris as your primary client, not her parents. I fear they'll try to minimize her inheritance or deny her access to it. If she comes to you suspecting theft or fraud, believe her. She's intelligent and perceptive. If she thinks something is wrong, something is wrong, help her fight if she needs to fight. She'll need allies, and you can be one. Wilson had honored that instruction by giving me Eleanor's sealed letter early when he'd learned about the trust fund theft. He'd been the ally Eleanor had asked him to be. I'd gathered all of Eleanor's letters and added them to the Eleanor Foundation archives. They were evidence of how early the pattern of mistreatment had started, and how clearly it had been visible to people who'd been willing to see it. But more than that, they were evidence of Eleanor's love, a grandmother who'd seen her granddaughter's pain and had tried to protect her, even from beyond the grave. 20 years after the Christmas confrontation, I'd organized a family gathering at my home. My parents were now in their mid-70s, Austin and Sloane in their 50s. Their children, My nieces and nephews, grown and starting their own families. It was Christmas Eve, exactly 20 years since the confrontation that had changed everything. I'd invited everyone to share what that night had meant to them from their perspectives. My therapist had suggested this as a potential path to full healing, creating space for everyone to acknowledge their part in the story and what they'd learned from it. Austin had gone first. That night was the moment I had to confront my own complicity. I'd benefited from a system that hurt Iris. And I'd chosen not to examine that system because examining it would have meant giving up my comfortable position. Iris forced me to see. It was painful, but necessary. I'm a better person for it. Sloane had spoken next. I'd convinced myself that Iris just preferred cheaper gifts, that she was different from me in ways that explained the disparity. But I knew better. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. And I chose ignorance because knowledge would have required action. Iris's confrontation took away my ability to hide from truth. I'm grateful she did, even though it was devastating at the time. My mother had been next, her voice shaking. That night, I had to face what I'd done to my own daughter. I'd stolen from her, treated her as less valuable, and convinced myself it was justified. Watching her present that evidence, seeing the pain I'd caused, realizing I'd criminally betrayed the child I was supposed to protect, it broke something in me. It took years to rebuild myself into someone who could actually acknowledge what I'd done without defensiveness or excuse. I'll never stop being ashamed of who I was. My father. I'd built an identity around being a good man, a successful father, someone who made sound decisions. Iris showed me that identity was false. I'd been a thief and an abuser who'd used financial manipulation to control my daughter. That revelation forced me to rebuild my entire understanding of myself. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I'm still working on it. Then it had been my turn. That night, I gave myself permission to stop accepting mistreatment. I'd spent 28 years learning to be grateful for scraps, to expect nothing, to hide my hurt. Standing up and presenting that evidence wasn't just about exposing theft. It was about saying I deserved better. It was about honoring my grandmother's belief in me and refusing to live the rest of my life as someone disposable. The revenge was satisfying. The accountability was necessary. But the real gift I gave myself was the realization that family loyalty doesn't require self-betrayal. That love without respect isn't actually love. That I could demand better treatment and survive the consequences of that demand. My oldest niece, Austin's daughter Charlotte, had spoken then. I was 12 when this happened. I didn't fully understand it then, but I've thought about it a lot as I've gotten older. Aunt Iris taught me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish or destructive. It's necessary. That documentation and evidence matter. That you should never accept being treated as less valuable, even by people who claim to love you. I've used those lessons in my own life. When my college roommate was stealing from me, I documented it and reported it instead of just accepting it. When a boyfriend tried to manipulate me financially, I recognized the pattern and ended it. Aunt Iris's example gave me a template for protecting myself. Other family members had shared similar reflections. The story had become part of our family's collective memory, not as a shameful secret to be hidden, but as a turning point that had forced everyone to confront truth and change. After everyone had spoken, I'd pulled out the clearance candle from 20 years ago. I'd kept it all these years, sealed in a display case. This candle represents 28 years of being told I was worth $7, I'd said. It represents a family system built on favoritism and exploitation. But it also represents the moment I decided that system was unacceptable. Tonight, 20 years later, we're gathered as a family that's been rebuilt on honesty rather than dysfunction. We still have scars. We still have complicated relationships. But we're not hiding the truth anymore. We're not pretending cheap gifts and stolen inheritances were normal or acceptable. So I want to do something symbolic. I want to light this candle, the last cheap gift I ever accepted, and use it to symbolically burn away the old family patterns. I'd lit the candle, and we'd all watched it burn, its cheap wax dripping, its clearance store scent filling the room. This is what transformation looks like, I'd said. Taking something that represented abuse and using it to create light. Taking pain and using it to build something better. Taking revenge and turning it into redemption. 20 years ago, I gave my family the truth. Tonight, I'm giving us all permission to fully move forward. The candle had burned down to nothing, and we'd sat together in comfortable silence, a family that had been destroyed and rebuilt, different but somehow stronger for having confronted its own dysfunction. 25 years after the confrontation, I'd been preparing for retirement. I'd spent decades helping others escape family financial abuse, and I was ready to step back, to let others lead the foundation I'd built. The Eleanor Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We'd helped over 3,000 people recover stolen inheritances. We lobbied for and achieved stronger legal protections for trust fund beneficiaries. We'd trained thousands of lawyers, social workers, and financial advisors to recognize and address family financial abuse. My book had sold over 2 million copies and been adapted into a documentary series that had won multiple awards. The Christmas confrontation had become a cultural touchstone, referenced in articles about family dynamics, financial abuse, and the importance of documentation. For my retirement celebration, we'd organized a gathering of people the foundation had helped over the years. Hundreds of them had come, each with a story about how my example had given them courage to fight their own battles. One woman had stood up to share, "My parents stole my disability settlement, $400,000 that was supposed to support me for life. I saw your story and realized I didn't have to accept it. I documented everything, filed charges, recovered my money. That settlement is now invested and supporting me just like it was supposed to. Without your example, I would have stayed silent." Another person, "My siblings convinced me I wasn't entitled to my share of our parents' estate. They used gaslighting and manipulation to make me doubt my own memories and perceptions. Then I read your book and learned that documentation defeats gaslighting. I had proof of what I was owed. I fought for it, and I won. You taught me that proof matters more than family pressure." Story after story. People sharing how my public confrontation had given them permission to do the same. How the template I'd created had empowered them to fight back. At the end of the evening, I'd stood to speak one final time. 25 years ago, I was given a cheap candle and decided I'd had enough. That decision changed my life and, apparently, created ripples that changed many of yours. But here's what I want you to understand. I'm not special. I'm not uniquely brave or strong. I was just a person who reached a breaking point and had access to documentation that made fighting back possible. Every single one of you could have done what I did. You did do what I did. You documented, you fought, you demanded better treatment. My story just happened to be public enough to show you that fighting was possible. The real heroes are the people who fight in private, without publicity or recognition. Who demand accountability in families that want to keep secrets hidden. The real heroes are the people who stand up to manipulation even when they're terrified. Who trust their perceptions even when others gaslight them. Who refuse to accept being disposable. That's all of you. You're the heroes of your own stories. Thank you for letting my story be part of yours. Thank you for taking the template I created and using it to protect yourselves. Thank you for proving that individual courage can create collective change. The applause had been overwhelming. As the celebration had wound down, my parents, now in their 80s, frail but present, had approached me. "We're proud of you," my father had said, "for building all of this from the pain we caused. For using what we did to you to protect others. We don't deserve to be proud," my mother had added. "But we are anyway." I'd looked at these elderly people who'd stolen from me, abused me, and spent years causing pain they'd only belatedly acknowledged. "I'm not who I am despite what you did," I'd told them. "I'm who I am partly because of what you did. Your abuse forced me to develop strength. Your theft taught me about documentation and accountability. Your mistreatment showed me what I didn't want to replicate in my own relationships. That doesn't mean the abuse was good. It was destructive and wrong. But I took your destruction and built something meaningful from the ruins. That's not your achievement. It's mine. But it did require your failure to create the conditions for my specific growth. We understand," my father had said. "And we're grateful you found a way to transform our worst behaviors into something that helps others." We'd parted with gentle hugs, not the closeness we'd never have, but the respectful distance we'd achieved. Now, at 53 years old, I'd been sitting in my study looking at that clearance candle in its display case. 28 years since it had been given to me. 25 years since I'd used it as the catalyst for exposing my family's dysfunction. The candle had become almost iconic, photographed for articles, referenced in discussions about family abuse, displayed in the Eleanor Foundation offices. A $7 object that had sparked transformation worth millions in recovered inheritances and prevented abuse. My life had been full and rich. I'd married Wesley and built a partnership based on equality and respect. We'd never had children, a choice, not a circumstance, but we'd created a different kind of family through the foundation and the connections we'd built with people we'd helped. Austin and Sloan had remained close siblings. We'd gathered monthly, maintained traditions, supported each other through various life challenges. They'd both become vocal advocates against family financial abuse, using their own experiences of complicity as teaching tools. My parents had died the previous year. Within months of each other. They'd spent their final 25 years in relative poverty, working modest jobs, living in a small home, completely stripped of the luxury they'd once enjoyed. But they'd also spent those years taking genuine responsibility, working to understand why they'd been abusive, and trying to make amends in whatever small ways they could. At my mother's funeral, I'd given a eulogy that was honest rather than flattering. My mother stole from me. She treated me as less valuable than my siblings. She gave me cheap gifts while giving them luxury items. She participated in financial fraud and psychological abuse that shaped my entire childhood and young adulthood. But she also did something rare. She eventually took full responsibility for what she'd done. She spent 25 years acknowledging her failures, working to change, and accepting the consequences of her actions without demanding forgiveness or reconciliation. She never fully repaired what she'd broken. Some damage is too extensive. But she stopped making it worse. She stopped lying to herself and others about what she'd done. And in her own small way, she tried to be better. That doesn't erase the abuse. But it's more than many abusers ever do. For that, I can offer respect, if not full forgiveness. No. In my study, I'd pulled out one more item I'd kept, the original photos of the trust fund documents from that basement filing cabinet discovery 28 years earlier. The evidence that had started everything. I'd also pulled out Eleanor's letters, her will, and all the documentation I'd compiled during that 3-month preparation period before the Christmas confrontation. All of it was being donated to the Eleanor Foundation archives. Future victims of family financial abuse would be able to study my case. See exactly how I documented the theft, learn from my strategies. The template would live on. Wesley had come into the study to find me surrounded by these old documents. Feeling nostalgic? He'd asked. Feeling complete. 28 years after receiving that cheap candle, 25 years after exposing the theft. I've built a life that's exactly what Eleanor hoped I would build. Independent. Meaningful. Based on my actual value rather than someone else's assessment. And the revenge? How does it feel 25 years later? Like justice that aged well. The revenge wasn't empty destruction. It was strategic accountability that created space for growth. My parents faced consequences. I recovered what was stolen. Other people learned from my example. That's the best possible outcome. No regrets? None. I gave myself the gift of refusing to be disposable. That gift has lasted my entire adult life. It shaped my career, my relationships, my sense of self. It was the most important thing I've ever done. I looked at the clearance candle one more time, this cheap object that had symbolized so much. They gave me the cheapest gift every year, I'd said. But this Christmas, when I gave them the truth, I gave myself something invaluable, freedom from accepting mistreatment. That's the real story. Not the revenge, not the legal battles, not even the foundation I built. The real story is that I learned my own worth and refused to live as if I was worth less. And that, Wesley had said, kissing my forehead, is why your story has inspired thousands of people. Because learning your own worth and demanding to be treated accordingly, that's the most powerful transformation possible. I'd nodded, feeling peace in a way I never had during those first 28 years of cheap gifts and stolen inheritances and quiet acceptance of mistreatment. The cheap candle had been meant to diminish me. Instead, it had lit the way toward the most authentic version of myself, the person Eleanor had always known I could become. 28 years after that candle. 25 years after the confrontation. A lifetime of building something better than what had been destroyed. That was revenge. That was justice. That was redemption. And more than anything, that was freedom.